The crimson sky of Kepler 442b burned like molten copper as Valeria Rind's research vessel spiraled through the atmosphere, its hull screaming against the alien winds. She gripped the console with hands that gleamed like polished silver, her emerald eyes reflecting the chaos of failing systems around her. The dimensional storm had torn through space without warning, ripping her small ship from the safety of the Nexorian fleet and hurling her toward this nightmare world the humans called Crimson Death. Emergency protocols activated. Her ship's AI announced in the melodic tones of her home language, even as sparks erupted from damaged circuits. Atmospheric entry in 30 seconds. Probability of survival, 12%. Valeria's heart hammered against her ribs as she fought with the controls. Her people, the Nexorians, were known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology and peaceful nature. Their silver skin could photosynthesize energy from starlight, and their enhanced intellect had made them master scientists and explorers. But all her knowledge meant nothing now as her ship plummeted toward the surface of the most hostile world in this sector. The impact came like a thunderclap. Metal shrieked, systems failed, and darkness claimed her consciousness. Miles away, Jake Sullivan felt the tremor through the reinforced walls of Outpost Bravo 7. The rugged Marine set down his protein ration and moved to the sensor array, his weathered hands dancing across the controls with practiced efficiency. At 32, Jake had spent the last 5 years stationed on this hellish frontier world, part of humanity's expansion into the outer rim. His brown hair was streaked with premature gray from the stress of constant vigilance, and his blue eyes held the hardened look of a man who had seen too much death. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered, studying the readings. Something big had just crashed about 10 clicks northwest of his position. The signature was all wrong for a meteor, and the energy readings suggested advanced technology. His orders were clear: investigate any anomalous activity and report back to command. But with the nearest backup 3 days away, Jake knew he was on his own. He suited up in his environmental gear, checking his plasma rifle and survival kit twice before stepping into the airlock. The atmosphere of Kepler 442b was technically breathable for humans, but the native predators more than made up for that small mercy. 6-legged shadow stalkers prowled the crimson forests, their hide tough enough to turn small arms fire. Acid-spitting tunnel worms could dissolve through military-grade armor in seconds. And then, there were the things that hadn't been cataloged, yet the ones that left behind only empty suits and bloodstains. The trek to the crash site took Jake through a landscape that looked like an artist's fever dream. Towering crystal formations jutted from the red soil like broken teeth, while bioluminescent fungi cast an eerie purple glow across the alien vegetation. The air tasted of copper and ozone, and every shadow could hide death. He found the wreckage, in a clearing where the ship had carved a furrow through the crystalline trees. The vessel was unlike anything in the human fleet, sleek where human ships were angular, graceful where they were utilitarian. Its hull gleamed with an almost organic sheen, and symbols that hurt to look at directly were etched along its sides. Jake approached cautiously, rifle ready. He had encountered alien technology before, and it rarely ended well for the humans involved. But as he circled the wreck, something made him pause. A sound. Soft, musical, and unmistakably feminine. He found her half buried under a collapsed section of hull, her silver skin catching the alien sunlight like liquid mercury. Jake's breath caught in his throat. She was undeniably beautiful, but in a way that seemed almost too perfect, too ethereal for this brutal world. Her hair was the color of moonlight, and even unconscious, her features held an otherworldly grace. "Jesus," Jake whispered, then quickly scanned the area for threats. The crash had attracted attention. Carrion feeders circled overhead, and he could hear the distinctive clicking of tunnel worms in the distance. Whatever she was, she wouldn't survive an hour out here without help. The decision went against every regulation in the book. Aliens were to be contained and studied, not rescued. But as Jake looked at her broken form, he found himself thinking, not of regulations, but of the loneliness that had been his constant companion on this dead world. He holstered his rifle and began clearing the debris. Her breathing was shallow but steady, and when he lifted her, she was surprisingly light. Her skin was warm to the touch, and he could feel the steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. The journey back to the outpost was a nightmare of stealth and speed. Jake moved through the alien landscape like a ghost, using every trick he had learned to avoid the predators that hunted these crystal forests. The woman in his arms stirred occasionally, mumbling in a language that sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. By the time he reached the outpost, Jake was exhausted and his nerves were frayed. He carried her to the medical bay, a small room equipped with the latest in human medical technology. As he laid her on the examination table, her eyes fluttered open. Jake found himself staring into emerald depths that seemed to hold the wisdom of stars. She looked up at him with confusion and fear, but also with something else, curiosity. She spoke in her musical language, and he could hear the question in her voice even if he couldn't understand the words. "Easy," Jake said softly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. I'm Jake Sullivan." She studied his face for a long moment, and he could see the intelligence behind those extraordinary eyes. Slowly, she pointed to herself and spoke a single word that sounded like silver bells. "Valeria?" Jake nodded and repeated it, surprised by how naturally it rolled off his tongue. "Valeria, that's beautiful." Something in his tone must have conveyed his meaning because she smiled, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat. Even injured and stranded on the most dangerous world in the sector, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Over the next few hours, Jake tended to her injuries with the same care he would show a wounded comrade. Her physiology was different from human, but similar enough that his medical training proved useful. She had several broken ribs, a concussion, and numerous cuts and bruises. But her body seemed to heal faster than any human's would, and by evening she was sitting up and attempting to communicate. The language barrier proved frustrating, but not insurmountable. Jake showed her his equipment, teaching her human words, while she taught him Nexorian ones. She was incredibly intelligent, picking up his language with startling speed. By the time the alien sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, they had established the basics of communication. "You save me," she said in halting English, her accent turning the simple words into something exotic and beautiful. Jake nodded, finding himself lost in her eyes. "Couldn't leave you out there. This place would have killed you." She gestured to the walls around them, understanding more than she could yet express. "Dangerous world?" "The most dangerous in the sector," Jake confirmed. "We call it Crimson Death. Everything here wants to kill you." Valeria's eyes widened and she looked at him with new understanding. He had risked his life to save a complete stranger, someone who wasn't even of his species. In her culture, such selflessness was the highest virtue. As the night deepened, Jake found himself drawn to her in ways he couldn't explain. She was alien, yes, but there was something about her presence that filled the empty spaces in his heart. The loneliness that had been his constant companion for 5 years seemed to retreat when she was near. They shared a simple meal of protein rations and water. Jake apologizing for the poor quality of the food. Valeria tasted it carefully, then smiled and said something in her language that sounded like gratitude. "Tomorrow," Jake said, "I'll try to contact my people. They might be able to help you get home." But even as he said it, Jake found himself hoping that tomorrow would never come. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone on this hostile world. And the woman sitting across from him, with her silver skin and emerald eyes, was making him feel things he thought he had forgotten how to feel. Outside the outpost, the sounds of the alien night began their deadly symphony. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow stalker howled its hunting cry. But inside the small sanctuary Jake had created, two beings from different worlds were discovering that some connections transcend species, language, and the vast emptiness between the stars. As Valeria settled into the small cot Jake had prepared for her, she looked at him with an expression that made his heart race. There was gratitude there, yes, but also something deeper. Something that spoke of possibilities that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "Thank you," she whispered in perfect English. her voice like music in the darkness. Jake smiled, feeling something stir in his chest that had been dormant for far too long. Get some rest, Valeria. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. But as he settled into his own bunk, Jake found himself staring at the ceiling and wondering if he would ever be able to let her go. The universe had thrown them together on this deadly world, and he was beginning to suspect that it wasn't entirely by accident. In the morning, everything would change. But for now, in the quiet darkness of the outpost, two hearts beat in rhythm across the impossible gulf between worlds, and the first sparks of something extraordinary began to kindle in the crimson night. Dawn on Kepler 442b came like a slow burn across the crimson sky, and Jake woke to find Valeria already awake, sitting by the small window and watching the alien sunrise paint the crystal forests in shades of fire. Her silver skin seemed to shimmer in the morning light, and he noticed that the cuts from yesterday had already healed completely. Beautiful, she said softly in English, though whether she meant the sunrise or something else, Jake couldn't tell. He moved to stand beside her, close enough to catch the subtle scent of starlight and ozone that seemed to cling to her skin. It's dangerous beauty, he warned. Those crystal trees, they're actually predators. They sense movement and fire crystalline spears that can pierce combat armor. Valeria turned to look at him, her emerald eyes wide with fascination rather than fear. You know this world well. How long have you lived here? 5 years, Jake replied, surprised by how much her English had improved overnight. 5 long, lonely years watching the perimeter for threats that never seemed to end. Something in his tone made her reach out and touch his arm. The contact sent electricity through him, and he saw her pupils dilate slightly in response. Lonely, she repeated, as if tasting the word. Yes, I understand, lonely. Before Jake could respond, the outpost's proximity alarms began to wail. He rushed to the sensor console, Valeria close behind him. The readings made his blood run cold. 6 shadow stalkers were approaching from the north, moving in perfect formation. They never hunted in packs that large unless something had driven them from their territory. We need to move, Jake said, grabbing his rifle and emergency pack. Those things will tear through the outpost's defenses in minutes. But Valeria was studying the sensor readings with the keen eye of a scientist. Jake, these creatures, they're not hunting. They're fleeing. Something bigger is coming. As if summoned by her words, a new contact appeared on the screen, massive, moving with purpose and heading straight for them. Jake had never seen anything like it in 5 years on this world. The caves, he said, making a snap decision. There's a network about 2 kilometers south. We can lose whatever that thing is in the tunnels. They ran through the crystal forest like ghosts. Jake leading the way while Valeria moved with surprising grace for someone unfamiliar with the terrain. Behind them, the outpost's automated defenses began firing, the sounds of combat echoing through the alien landscape. The caves were a maze of natural tunnels carved into the planet's bedrock, and Jake knew them well enough to navigate in the dark. But as they descended into the depths, Valeria suddenly stopped, her hand pressed against the smooth stone wall. Jake, she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. This isn't natural stone. These tunnels, they're artificial. She was right. Now that she had pointed it out, Jake could see the subtle signs of construction. The walls were too smooth, the angles too precise. Someone or something had built this place. They followed the tunnels deeper, Valeria's natural night vision guiding them when Jake's flashlight failed. The passages opened into a vast underground chamber, and both of them stopped in awe. Ancient machinery hummed with dormant power, its design unlike anything from human or Nexorian technology. Crystalline structures pulsed with soft bioluminescent light, and in the center of it all stood a device that looked like a fusion of art and science. It's beautiful, Valeria breathed, moving toward the central structure as if drawn by an invisible force. But Jake caught her arm, pulling her close. The contact sent heat racing through both of them, and for a moment the ancient chamber faded away. Wait, he said, his voice rough. We don't know what it does. Valeria looked up at him, and Jake saw his own desire reflected in her emerald eyes. The danger, the adrenaline, and the impossible situation had stripped away all pretense. She was an alien woman from a distant world, and he was a human soldier stranded on the galaxy's most lethal planet. By all rights, they should have nothing in common. But as she stood there in his arms, Jake knew that he was falling in love with her. "Jake," she whispered, and he could hear the same longing in her voice that was burning in his chest. He kissed her then, soft at first, then with growing passion as she responded. Her lips tasted like starlight and promise, and when she pressed her silver body against his, Jake felt complete for the first time in years. She was warm and real and perfect in his arms, and the universe could burn around them for all he cared. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Valeria's skin was glowing softly, a Nexorian response to intense emotion that made her even more beautiful in the chamber's ethereal light. "I don't care that we're different species," Jake said fiercely. "I don't care that you're from another world. I've been alone on this planet for 5 years, and you're the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me." Valeria smiled, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. "On Nexoria, we believe that souls recognize each other across any distance. When I first saw you, even through my pain and fear, I felt that recognition." Their second kiss was deeper, more desperate, filled with the knowledge that they might not survive whatever was hunting them above. Jake's hands tangled in her moonlight hair while she explored the hard planes of his chest through his shirt. They were two beings from different worlds, but their bodies fit together as if they had been made for each other. "We should find a way out of here," Jake said reluctantly, though every instinct screamed at him to lose himself in her embrace. But Valeria was studying the ancient machinery with renewed focus. "Jake, I think this is a communications array. If I can activate it, I might be able to contact my people." The thought of her leaving hit Jake like a physical blow, but he pushed the selfish reaction aside. She deserved to go home, to be with her own kind among the stars. He helped her examine the alien technology, using his tactical knowledge to complement her scientific expertise. As they worked together, their hands brushing as they manipulated the controls, Jake found himself memorizing every detail of her face. The way her eyes lit up when she solved a particularly complex puzzle. The graceful movements of her silver fingers as she traced circuitry patterns. The soft sounds of concentration she made when focused on a problem. "I think I've got it," Valeria said finally, her hand hovering over what looked like an activation switch. But she hesitated, looking at Jake with an expression that tore at his heart. "Go ahead," he said gently. "Your people are probably worried about you." She activated the device, and the chamber filled with harmonious chimes as the ancient machinery came to life. A holographic display flickered into existence, showing star charts and communication protocols. But instead of sending a distress signal, Valeria began inputting different commands. "What are you doing?" Jake asked. "Looking for information about this place," she replied, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls. "If this technology is as old as I think it is, it might hold answers about why this planet is so hostile." The display shifted, showing historical records that made both of them gasp. The chamber wasn't just a communications array, it was a monument to a failed experiment. Millennia ago, an ancient race had attempted to terraform Kepler 442b, intending to create a paradise world. But something had gone wrong. The terraforming process had been corrupted, turning the planet into a death world where only the most vicious predators could survive. That's why everything here is so deadly, Jake realized. The whole ecosystem was artificially accelerated to produce apex predators. But Valeria had found something else in the records, and her face had gone pale. "Jake, the corruption wasn't accidental. Something was feeding on the terraforming energy, growing stronger with each passing century. And it's still here." As if, summoned by her words, the chamber began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the ancient machinery sparked and flickered. Through the tunnel entrance came a sound that made Jake's blood freeze, a roar that seemed to come from the very bowels of the planet. "The thing that was chasing us," Valeria whispered. "It's found us." Jake grabbed his rifle, knowing it would be useless against whatever was coming. But Valeria was still working at the controls, her fingers flying over the holographic interface. "There's a way to stop it," she said urgently. "The original terraforming protocol, it's still active. If we can reverse the process, we can starve the creature of the energy it's been feeding on. Do it, Jake said, moving to cover the tunnel entrance. It requires a genetic key from 2 different species, Valeria said, her voice breaking. The original builders designed it as a safeguard. If we do this, we'll be bound to this place. We can never leave. Jake looked at her, understanding flooding through him. She was giving up her chance to go home, to be with her own people among the stars. For him, for them. Are you sure? He asked. Valeria smiled, and it was like sunrise after the longest night. I told you souls recognize each other. Across any distance, mine has found its home, Jake Sullivan, and it's not on Nexoria. They pressed their hands to the genetic scanners together, and the ancient machinery responded with a harmony that seemed to fill their very souls. Energy flowed between them, binding them not just to the terraforming protocol, but to each other. Jake felt Valeria's consciousness touch his own, sharing memories and emotions in a communion deeper than any physical touch. The creature burst into the chamber just as the protocol activated. It was massive, a thing of shadow and malevolence that had fed on corrupted energy for millennia. But as the terraforming process reversed, it began to weaken and fade, its roars of rage echoing off the chamber walls. It's working, Valeria gasped, her hand still pressed against Jake's on the scanner. Above them, they could hear the sounds of change. The crystal predator trees were dissolving. The acid pools were neutralizing. The very air was becoming cleaner and more breathable. Kepler 442b was being reborn as the paradise world it was always meant to be. When the process finally completed, the creature was gone, and the chamber was filled with peaceful silence. Jake and Valeria collapsed together, exhausted but triumphant. So, what happens now? Jake asked, pulling her close. Valeria smiled, her silver skin glowing with contentment. Now we build a new world together, a place where humans and Nexorians can live in harmony, where our children can grow up under crimson skies that are beautiful instead of deadly. Jake kissed her again, tasting the promise of their future on her lips. They were no longer alone on a hostile world. They were the architects of paradise, bound together by love and sacrifice, and the infinite possibilities that stretched out before them among the stars. Outside the chamber, the first gentle rain in millennia began to fall on the transforming world of Kepler 442b. And in the depths below, 2 hearts beat as one, proof that love could indeed conquer any distance, any difference, and any danger the universe could devise. The galaxy's most lethal planet had become humanity's greatest love story, and Jake and Valeria were just beginning to write their legend across the crimson skies of their new home.